That guy.
Another
Rival Empire.
The guys are friendly?
Doesn't matter. If you
Joins or fights the enemy, their systems are lost.
Montu.
We need a plan of attack.
I have a plan. Attack.
The best defense is a good offense. And in Stellaris, outcompeting your rivals economically will lead you to having a larger fleet, a larger military presence, and therefore being able to counter and subdue them with ease. But what do we do when we are the smaller nation? When we have a smaller economy, when we have less research, when we are generally weaker than our opponents? Is there a way to surmount the odds and win an asymmetric war or asymmetric engagement in Stellaris? Well, today I'm going to be looking at some tactics that can allow you to fend off larger and more powerful neighbors and rivals. We're going to be looking at tactics that will work against both the computer and against players.
So let us understand the situation. We are going into battle against a tough and determined enemy. I can't promise you that I will bring you all home alive.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
The first tactic I'm going to be demonstrating is something called Hyperlane camping. Now, what is Hyperlane camping? Well, let's say we're in a war and we have a fleet, and our fleet is somewhat inferior to the enemy, but the main way that it is inferior is that it has less range. So this is when you have technological inferiority mainly. So what you can do instead is sit very, very close to the edge of your system at a hyperlane jump point, meaning that if any enemy ships were to fly in, they would have to fly in and immediately both fleets would engage each other at almost zero range. What does that do? Well, that means that both fleets, no matter the range of their weapons, will get to fire an initial volley with all of their weapons. That can be really useful if you have lots of small and medium weapons and your opponent has lots of large weapons or weapons with a longer range. For instance, if they're running a heavy amount of neutron launchers or kinetic artillery and you don't have that technology yet. To boost the effectiveness of this tactic, as long as your opponent doesn't have a high enough intel level to know where all of your fleets are, you can park yourself inside of a nebula. Now, this fleet is inside of a nebula, meaning that hostile sensors cannot know that my ships are here, and they also cannot know where they are, allowing you to take enemy fleets by surprise by camping on the edge of hyperlanes. Something else that's important to note here as well is by camping on the edge of a hyperlane like this, there's another system, SAP here, quite close to Yarrick there. Let's say this fleet at Hixar was an enemy fleet and I knew it was going to be flying through Yarrick. Well, what I could do as well is when they jump in here, I can make sure I'm watching them, see when they're about to fly in here, I could jump in just over here, meaning I could catch the other fleet in this system one hyperlane jump away. So because there are some hyperlanes here with very small angles between them, I can sit one hyperlane away and still be effectively screening this system as long as I'm paying attention. Now, what you can also do to mitigate somebody who is hyperlane camping is to make sure that you jump in with another fleet. For instance, I have this transport fleet here. Now, if I were to get this transport fleet to fly in first to this system and make sure that the second fleet were to arrive a day later, I'll just do that in the reverse to show you what I mean. That way I can get this transport fleet to arrive first, the enemy will offload all of their alpha strike, all of their initial shots at it, and then 1 to 2 days later my secondary fleet would arrive. To do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to queue up the jumps, 34 days, this other one is 42 days. So I'm simply going to wait for a few days until this gets down to, there we are, 36. Let's get it to 35. And then I'm going to jump in this fleet first. So what I'm going to see is the transport fleet is going to arrive first, followed quite closely by my other fleet. So let's jump in here and take a look. And there we are, there's the transport fleet, and a day or so later the other fleet arrived. Now what that's going to do is it's going to be effectively countering that hyperlane camping. because what you can do, your opponent's in this system. I'm going to jump in first with the transport fleet. As I said, they will take the damage, and then my regular fleet will get to fire back with a complete alpha strike. Now, of course, your opponent may attempt to do something similar as well. So in that case, neither of you are going to get the bonuses associated with that, because as soon as your regular fleet is in there, the fleets will be targeting the regular fleets. They'll stop targeting these transport fleets. And this really is the essence of kiting. What we're going to be doing with kiting is making sure that some other fleet, you could also use a fleet of corvettes with no upgrades on them, are going to be taking the brunt of the opponent's firepower first, and then your main fleet is going to, or your fleets behind, are going to engage slightly after. So it's always important, if you're trying to kite with your transports, to make sure that they are ahead of your other fleet, and your fleet, for instance, here is a bit dangerous. I'd probably be in range of being struck from a fleet coming in from Hixar, so actually I'd want to be slightly further back. But you have to make sure as well you're not too far back. For instance, if I was all the way over here, well, what could happen is that being at this distance, this fleet would take a load of damage. I would begin to move up to come into range, by which point they take a second volley, die out, and then when I got into combat, well, the combat might have been reset, and then I'm just going to be taking it to the face anyway, and I've already lost my fleet. You can also use star bases to kite enemy fleets. What you need to do here is make sure that your fleet is some distance behind your star base at a point where it won't get engaged. And then once the star base is engaged, it should last for some time. They usually have quite a reservoir of hull and armor and shields, and they should engage. You should then, after that initial volley is fired, move your fleet in and engage the enemy. So the point here is always is that you are negating your opponent's ability to hit you, and you are hitting them as soon as possible. This can allow you to overcome fleets that are larger than yours and technologically superior with careful tactical planning with the maneuvering of your ships. Of course, if the enemy is so vastly superior to you that you simply cannot win that, well, then you need to move on to some different tactics to win or at least survive the war. Here we have just such a situation. I am at war with a fallen empire. In the local area to this part of my empire, I've got a small fleet presence, around 25k, but that won't be enough to take on this large 45,000 fleet power fleet of fallen empire ships. But I've made sure to strategically position a fortress world at the edge of my space here. This is a vital system. It's connecting different routes in and out of my space together. In order to move further into my empire, they will have to take this system. And, well, namely, they'll have to remove this planet as an obstacle. So what is this? This is a fortress habitat. I've upgraded my fortress so it has an FTL inhibitor. That's really important. It's going to prevent these fleets from jumping out of a system to a different system other than the one they entered from. In addition to that, I've also got a planetary shield generator, reducing bombardment damage, and I've set it as a fortress station. Or you could also do the same with a regular planet as a fortress world. Now, that means that this 50k fleet is only doing 0.04% devastation per day. It is going to take a long time before the devastation gets to 50%, where of course at 50% this FTL inhibitor will no longer function. So that's going to enable me to, in essence, set up bulkheads around my empire so that I may have lost the space battle in this region, although in another region I will be able to concentrate my forces to defeat the enemy in detail. And doing something like that is really key when you're fighting an asymmetric war where you have a lower fleet power than your opponent. You need to be focusing on their fleets and defeating them where you can, and making sure to inflict casualties and holding them off where you can't fight them. Now, so let's say that I really didn't want to lose this system, this planet of Scythia. What could I do? Well, luckily there's a technology that allows me to build armies quickly and efficiently. It is the clone army technology. It's going to allow me to pump out armies in only 30 days and at a slightly reduced cost as opposed to regular assault armies. Now, if we queue a few of these up, you'll notice, so I'm taking some bombardment damage here to this army, but what we need to see is how quickly we can build this army as opposed to how fast one of our armies is damaged. So there we are. We only took around 75% damage, and that's how much time it took us to build up this one clone army. So at around 45k, you can probably build 3 clone armies for every one that they destroy. At around 150k of fleet power bombarding you, that's where you're going to start running into some difficulties, or if they have the Armageddon stance, something like that. Now, this means that on planets where you simply do not want to lose them, you can pump out these armies as much as you can, as long as you've got a decent mineral saving. And while you're doing that, the war exhaustion of your opponent is going to slowly tick up. And this means that you can basically exhaust them to the point where they are forced to sue for peace without losing key planets and key systems, which will then give you time to repair and rebuild your navy to come back into the fight again. The next thing I'm going to look at is whether it's possible to actually maintain a navy without paying maintenance on that navy, and being able to have a fleet ready to deploy in a matter of days, weeks and months without it seeming like you're actually building up a fleet. Now, what we can do here, I'm going to use destroyers as an example for this. I'm going to queue up quite a few destroyers, quite a few of them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let them start building. Now, what I'm going to be doing with these destroyers, when they are almost built, I'll be using shift and clicking and sending these to the very bottom of the build queue. What will that do? Well, while a ship is in the build queue, you are not having to pay maintenance on it. You don't have to, it doesn't count towards your fleet cap. There are no issues associated with it existing. I mean, you can even click on it and cancel the build, refunding your alloys. So we're about to get to around 10 days. So what I'm going to do is click down all of these, and now we've got the next 6 are building up. And I'm going to keep doing that until either I get to the bottom of my build queue, at which point I'm going to have to cancel all of these. If I don't want to build them, I want to refund the alloys. Or I'm going to let the fleet pop out, and I'll suddenly go from having not very many ships to having all of these ships out there in space in one single go. Now, this also means that in a multiplayer situation, you can actually hide your alloys and the number of alloys you have at your disposal from the other players, from your opponents. Now, why is that important? Well, that can mean that you are able to basically hide how strong you are. And in hiding how strong you are, you can be somewhat scary. It's always scary not knowing the strength of an opponent before you go to battle with them and before you go to war. So here we go, and I'm going to get all of these ships out now in a matter of days. We've gone from no fleet, 6, 7, 8, 12, brilliant. And there we are, 18 ships to what seemed like it only took around 10 to 20 days in time to build all of these ships. Now, and of course, if I decided that actually I wasn't about to go to war, I could start cancelling all of those build orders. But oh, here we are. We've actually had a war declaration, not against us, but proposed. But I'm actually going to decline this and get on with the video. Now we're going to take a look at the return order. So what does that do? Well, if you are anywhere, you can return to the starbase you set as a home. I'll click return and it'll send me home. But what happens if I have no path to return home? Well, for a civilian ship, if you had no path to return home, you would be offered the choice of getting lost in FTL and coming back automatically over a period of time. Well, can we do that for our regular ships? Yes, we can for our military ships. Let's bring this fleet back and we'll jump back here. So what we're going to do, and this is something that is usually banned in multiplayer, but you can use it to your heart's content against the computer, is going to restrict all of the systems adjacent to our fleet. What that is going to do is going to mean our fleet has no path to return home when we click this button First it moves to the edge of the system, I click again when it gets there, and now I get the missing in action prompt, and I'm going to say yes, and that's going to mean my fleet will disappear and it will return as if it had gone missing in action and retreated from a combat. How is this useful? Well, you could use this to move a fleet deep into enemy territory, attacking as much as you want, and then retreat as soon as the enemy gets a large fleet ready to attack you, without ever risking those ships and possibly having no way to return home with them other than flying through an enemy fleet. This means raiding can be a very easy tool with no downside for your ships. So how can you use these tactics or techniques together to enable you to defeat a superior enemy? Well, by using things like hyperlane camping, by kiting your enemy's alpha strikes and enemy's ships, you can make sure that their superior fleets are able to do less damage on an individual basis per ship engagement. And then on top of that, you can use other methods like the return button to go FTL inside your enemy territory to make sure that whilst your main fleet is attacking and possibly defending some of your space, you can have some smaller fleets that absolutely would not stand up to an enemy assault or an enemy attack, and you can use those fleets without the fear of taking losses. Now, of course, in a multiplayer situation, you can't retreat like that because that kind of tactic is banned, but you should still be using your fleets to harass and annoy your opponent. Doing any sort of economic damage in Stellaris is very important. The more of an economy you can maintain during a war, and the more damage you can inflict on an opponent and reduce their ability to respond to you, the better the outcome you will have. Overall, in a losing war, you want to make sure you are holding your planets as tightly as you possibly can. To do that, you need to employ fortresses, shield generators, and using things like clone armies to make sure that you are able to defend your planets and not lose them, so that when you get to a point where you can force your opponent to peace out, when the war exhaustion is at 100%, you can retain control of your core planets and core systems. And that wraps it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like. If you'd like to see more content like this, please subscribe. And if you've got any feedback for me, please leave a comment. Also, if you'd like to support this channel, there's a link to Patreon down below in the description.